wow. Oh, I look quite cozy. I like set myself up with like a little cozy reading corner, and I think I did quite a good job. Hi everyone. I have my lovely girlfriend Titi on FaceTime with me.
Hello.
So I don't feel a bit like a lemon just like reading to myself. I'm sure you'll provide some entertaining commentary as well. But yeah, the idea for this live stream came from a date night we actually had at the beginning of the week, where we just read aloud from like our favorite books, old and new. So I read TT this series that I'm about to read you now, and they loved it. So then I kind of had the idea that I could read it in a live stream to anyone who wants to like hang out, because back in the beginning of the year, in the first lockdown, we did like little live streams like that where we'd bake or just hang out. And I feel like in these cold winter months still, need a little bit of a space to just chill and have some background noise, or, you know, if you get super into the book, that's fine. If you just want some background noise, that's fine too. This book is like one of my old, I say childhood, I feel like it wasn't that long ago, but I guess it was. I feel like it was at least a decade ago. But this is a book series called Skullduggery Pleasant. And if you've read it, please let me know in the chat, because I need to know that I'm not alone. I posted about it earlier on Twitter, and a few people were like, oh, I remember those books. But this, I wasn't a kid who grew up on Harry Potter, shockingly, I know. I didn't read those till like much later on in my young adulthood. But Skullduggery Pleasant was a series that I started reading from the age of like, I don't know, 12 or 13. And it's very, very good. Like very well written, very funny. I think it's like got a real like unique sense of humor that you don't see often in like young adult books. It's very, very funny, written by a guy called Derek Landy, who's an Irish author. And it's about magic and adventure and mystery and a skeleton detective who is undead. And it's just, I mean, like from that alone, you're gonna have fun. I read it to TD and they were very entertained.
It's so cute.
So the book's set in Ireland. I'm not going to be doing Irish accent for the characters, because you would be embarrassed, I would be embarrassed, it would just be terrible. So I'll just use my voice.
It sounds very, very cute in your British accent.
Oh, thank you. Oh, and I have my cats here too. If they cause chaos, which they likely will, we're gonna ignore it, or you're gonna ignore me whilst I shout at them. But yeah. I did have my curtains down, and I had to put them back up and wrap them around the curtain railing, because my cat likes to climb them, and I just wasn't having that. But we have some candles, and there's and my light, which is off because I tried turning it on and it looked like there was like a glowing UFO behind me. So we're not doing that. But yeah, I'm sat in my reading armchair, which I never use. So I'm glad it's getting some use.
In a book, reading rainbow.
I don't know what that means. What is that?
Oh no! It was a TV show. Okay, anyway.
Awkward. I know what you're talking about. Okay. So I'm gonna just start. I only read you like bits and pieces from this book, didn't I? I didn't start from the beginning. So you get to hear it. Excited? Okay. I also have a heated blanket, so like I'm fully in my reading zone.
I'm in bed.
Didi's in bed and has only just woken up from a nap. So thank you for gracing us with your consciousness. That's much appreciated. So, Skullduggery Pleasant, Book 1, Chapter 1, and it's just called Stephanie.
He's so cute.
Gordon Edgley's sudden death came as a shock to everyone, not least himself. One moment he was in his study, 7 words in the 25th sentence of the final chapter of his new book, and the darkness rained upon them, and the next he was dead. A tragic loss, his mind echoed numbly as he slipped away. The funeral was attended by family and acquaintances, but not many friends. Gordon hadn't been a well-liked figure in the publishing world, for although the books he wrote, tales of horror and magic and wonder, regularly reared their heads in the bestseller lists, he had the disquieting habit of insulting people without realizing it, then laughing at their shock. It was at Gordon's funeral, however, that Stephanie Edgley first caught sight of the gentleman in the tan overcoat. He was standing under the shade of a large tree, away from the crowd, the coat buttoned up all the way, despite the warmth of the afternoon. A scarf was wrapped around the lower half of his face, and even from her position on the far side of the grave, Stephanie could make out the wild and frizzy hair that escaped from the wide-brimmed hat he wore low over his gigantic sunglasses. She watched him, intrigued by his appearance, and then, like he knew he was being observed, he turned and walked back through the rows of headstones and disappeared from sight. After the service, Stephanie and her parents traveled back to her dead uncle's house, over a humpbacked bridge and along a narrow road that carved its way through thick woodland. The gates were heavy and grand and stood open, welcoming them into the estate. The grounds were vast, and the old house itself was ridiculously big. There was an extra door in the living room, a door disguised as a bookcase, and when she was younger, Stephanie liked to think that no one else knew about this door, not even Gordon himself. It was a secret passageway, like in the stories she'd read, and she'd make up adventures about haunted houses and smuggle treasure. This secret passageway would always be her escape route, and the imaginary villains in these adventures would be dumbfounded by her sudden and mysterious disappearance. But now this door, this secret passageway, stood open, and there was a steady stream of people through it, and she was saddened that this little piece of magic had been taken from her. Tea was served, and drinks were poured, and little sandwiches were passed around on silver trays, and Stephanie watched the mourners casually appraise their surroundings. The major topic of hushed conversation was the will. Gordon wasn't a man who inspired or even demonstrated any great affection, so no one could predict who would inherit his substantial fortune. Stephanie could see the greed sweep into the watery eyes of her father's other brother, a horrible little man called Fergus, as he nodded sadly and spoke somberly, and pocketed the silverware when he thought no one was looking. Fergus's wife was a thoroughly dislikable, sharp-featured woman named Beryl. She drifted through the crowd, deep in unconvincing grief, prying for gossip and digging for scandal. Her daughters did their best to ignore Stephanie. Carol and Crystal were twins, 15 years old, and as sour and vindictive as their parents. Whereas Stephanie was dark-haired, tall, slim, and strong, they were bottle blonde, stumpy, and dressed in clothes that made them bulge in all the wrong places. Apart from their brown eyes, no one would guess that the twins were related to her. She liked that. It was the only thing about them she liked. She left them to their petty glares and snide whispers and went for a walk.
The Dursleys.
Basically, yeah. The Dursleys, but there's 2 Dudley Dursleys.
What names? Like Fergus and Beryl.
Listen, you have to be very clear from the outset that these are not good people, and no offense to anyone called Fergus or Beryl, but those names give off a certain... Actually, I quite like the name Fergus. But anyway, the corridors of her uncle's house were long and lined with paintings. The floor beneath Stephanie's feet was wooden, polished to a gleam, and the house smelled of age. Not musty exactly, but experienced. These walls and these floors had seen a lot in their time, and Stephanie was nothing but a faint whisper to them. Here one instant, gone the next. Gordon had been a good uncle. Arrogant and irresponsible, yes, but also childish and enormous fun, with a light in his eyes, a glint of mischief. When everyone else was taking him seriously, Stephanie was privy to the winks and the nods and the half smiles that he would shoot her way when they weren't looking. Even as a child, she felt she understood him better than most. She liked his intelligence and his wit, and the way he didn't care what people thought of him. He'd been a good uncle to have. He taught her a lot. She knew that her mother and Gordon had briefly dated. Courted, her mother had called it. But when Gordon had introduced her to his younger brother, it was love at first sight. Gordon liked to grumble that he had never got more than a peck on the cheek, but had stepped aside graciously and had quite happily gone on to have large, numerous torrid affairs with numerous beautiful women. He used to say that it had almost been a fair trade, but he suspected that he had lost out. Stephanie climbed the staircase, pushed open the door to Gordon's study, and stepped inside. The walls were filled with the framed covers from his bestsellers and shared space with all manner of awards. One entire wall was made up of shelves, jammed with books. There were biographies and historical novels and science texts and psychology tomes, and there were battered little paperbacks stuck in between. A lower shelf had magazines, literary reviews, and quarterlies. Stephanie passed the shelves which housed the first editions of Gordon's novels and approached the desk. She looked at the chair where he died, trying to imagine him there, how he must have slumped. And then a voice so smooth it could have been made of velvet. At least he died doing what he loved. She turned, surprised, to see the man from the funeral in the overcoat and hat standing in the doorway. The scarf was still wrapped, the sunglasses still on, the fuzzy hair still poking out. His hands were gloved. Yes, Stephanie said, because she couldn't think of anything else to say. At least there's that. You're one of his nieces, then? The man asked. You're not stealing anything, you're not breaking anything, so I guess you're Stephanie. She nodded and took the opportunity to look at him more closely. She couldn't see even the tiniest bit of his face beneath the scarf and sunglasses. Please don't eat my plant. I will be very cross. Not allowed. Were you a friend of his? She asked. He was tall, this man, tall and thin, though his coat made it difficult to judge. I was, he answered, with a move of his head. This slight movement made her realize that the rest of his body was unnaturally still. I've known him for years, met him outside a bar in New York when I was over there, back when he had just published his first novel. Stephanie couldn't see anything behind the sunglasses. They were black as pitch. Are you a writer too? Me? No, I wouldn't know where to start. But I got to live out my writer fantasies through Gordon. You had writer fantasies. Doesn't everyone? I don't know. I don't think so. Oh, then that would make me seem kind of odd, wouldn't it? Well, Stephanie answered, it would help. Gordon used to talk about you all the time, boast about his little niece. He was an individual of character, your uncle. It seems that you are too. You say that like you know me. Strong-willed, intelligent, sharp-tongued, doesn't suffer fools gladly. Remind you of anyone? Yes, Gordon. Interesting, said the man. Luna, stop eating the leaves! I knew this would happen. Interesting, said the man, because those are the exact words he used to describe you. His gloved fingers dipped into his waistcoat and brought out an ornate pocket watch on a delicate gold chain. Well, good luck in whatever you decide to do with your life. Thank you, Stephanie said, a little dumbly. You too? She felt the man's smile, though she could see no mouth, and he turned from the doorway and left her there. Stephanie found she couldn't take her eyes off where he had been. Who was he? She hadn't even got his name. She crossed over to the door and stepped out, wondering how he had vanished from sight so quickly. She hurried down the stairs and reached the large hall without seeing him. She opened the front door just as the big black car turned out onto the road. She watched him drive away, stayed there for a few moments, then reluctantly rejoined her extended family in the living room, just in time to see Fergus slip a silver ashtray into his breast pocket. I'm going to have to move this plant pot because I've lost 2 leaves. And it's only got like 4. Cats, I love them. She doesn't touch that plant pot ever. Yeah, I see you. Get out of my spot. Get out. You're so naughty. Well, that was chapter 1.
That's so fun. I love the writing style.
It's cool. It gets like that was a pretty like chill, like set the scene chapter, but then we have chapter 2, The Will.
I'm so excited. I love the way you read it.
Life in the Edgley household was fairly uneventful. Stephanie's mother worked in a bank and her father owned a construction company, and she had no brothers or sisters, so the routine they had settled into was one of amiable convenience. But even so, there was always the voice in the back of her mind telling her that there should be more to her life than this, more to her life than the small coastal town of Haggard. She just couldn't figure out what that something was. Her first year of secondary school had just come to a close, and she was looking forward to the summer break. Stephanie didn't like school. She found it difficult to get along with her classmates, not because they weren't nice people, but simply because she had nothing in common with them. And she didn't like teachers. She didn't like the way they demanded respect that they hadn't earned. Stephanie had no problem doing what she was told, just so long as she was given a good reason why she should. She had spent the first few days of the summer helping out her father, answering phones and sorting through the files in his office. Gladys, his secretary of 7 years, had decided that she'd had enough of the construction business and wanted to try her hand as a performance artist. Stephanie found it vaguely discomforting whenever she passed her on the street, this 43-year-old woman doing a modern dance interpretation of Faust. Gladys had made herself a costume to go with the act, a costume, she said, that symbolized the internal struggle Faust was going through, and apparently she refused to be seen in public without it. Stephanie did her best to avoid catching Gladys's eye. If Stephanie wasn't helping out in the office, she was either down at the beach swimming or locked in her room listening to music. She was in her room trying to find the charger for her mobile phone when her mother knocked on the door and stepped in. She was still dressed in the somber clothes that she had worn to the funeral, though Stephanie had tied back her long dark hair and changed into her usual jeans and trainers within 2 minutes of returning home. "We got a call from Gordon's solicitor," her mother said, sounding a little surprised. "They want to set the reading of the will." "Oh," Stephanie responded. "What do you think he left you?" "Well, we'll find out tomorrow. You too, because you're coming with us." "I am," Stephanie said with a slight frown. "Your name's on the list, that's all I know. We're leaving at 10, okay? I'm supposed to be helping Dad in the morning." "Well, he called Gladys, asked her to fill in for a few hours as a favor. She said yes, as long as she could wear the peanut suit." They left the solicitors at 10:15 the next morning, 15 minutes later than planned, thanks to Stephanie's father's casual disregard for punctuality. He ambled through the house, looking like there was something he'd forgotten, and he was just waiting for it to occur to him again. He nodded and smiled whenever his wife told him to hurry up, said, "Yes, absolutely," and just before he was due to join them in the car, he meandered off again, looking around with a dazed expression. "He does this on purpose," Stephanie's mother said as they sat in the car, seatbelts on and ready to go. They watched him appear at the front door, shrug into his jacket, tuck in his shirt, go to step out, and then pause. "He looks like he's about to sneeze," Stephanie remarked. "No," her mother responded. "He's just thinking." She stuck her head out of the window. "Desmond, what's wrong now?" He looked up, puzzled. "I think I'm forgetting something." Stephanie leaned forward in the back seat, took a look at him, and spoke to her mother, who nodded and stuck her head out again. Where are your shoes, dear? He looked down at his socks, one brown, one navy, and his clouded expression cleared. He gave them the thumbs up and disappeared from view. That man, I just love him. He's such an idiot. In the best way. He's so nice. That man, her mother said, shaking her head. Did you know he once lost a shopping centre? He what? I never told you this. It was the first big contract he got. His company did a wonderful job and he was driving his clients to see it, and he forgot where he put it. He drove around for almost an hour until he saw something he recognized. He may be a very talented engineer, but I swear he's got the attention span of a goldfish. So unlike Gordon. They weren't very alike, were they? Her mother smiled. It wasn't always that way. They used to do everything together. The three of them were inseparable. What, even Fergus? Even Fergus. But when your grandmother died, they all drifted apart. Gordon started mixing with a strange crowd after that. Strange in what way? Oh, they probably just appeared strange to us, her mother said with a small laugh. Your dad was getting started in the construction business and I was in college and we were what you might call normal. Gordon resisted being normal and his friends, they scared us. We never knew what they were into, but we knew it wasn't anything normal. Exactly. They scared your dad most of all, though. Why? Stephanie's father walked out of the house, shoes on, and closed the front door after him. I think he was more like Gordon than he liked to let on, her mother said quietly, and then her dad got into the car. Okay, he said proudly, I'm ready. They looked at him as he nodded, chuffed with himself. He strapped on his seatbelt and turned his key. The engine purred to life. Stephanie waved to Jasper, an 8-year-old boy with unfortunate ears, as her dad backed out onto the road. Put the car in gear and they were off, narrowly missing their wheelie bin as they went. The drive to the solicitor's office in the city took a little under an hour, and they arrived 20 minutes late. They were led up a flight of creaky stairs to a small office, too warm to be comfortable, with a large window that offered a wonderful view of the brick wall across the street. Fergus and Beryl were there, and they showed their displeasure at having been kept waiting by looking at their watches and scowling. Stephanie's parents took the remaining chairs, and Stephanie stood behind them as the solicitor peered at them through cracked spectacles. Now can we get started? Beryl snapped. The solicitor, a short man named Mr. Fedgwick, with the girth and appearance of a sweaty bowling ball, tried smiling. We still have one more person to wait on, he said, and Fergus's eyes bulged. Who? He demanded. There can't be anyone else. We are the only siblings Gordon had. Who is it? It's not some charity, is it? I never trusted charities. They always want something from you. It's not a charity, Mr. Fedgwick said. He did say, however, that he might be a little late. Who said? Stephanie's father asked, and the solicitor looked down at the file open before him. A most unusual name, this, he said. It seems we are waiting on one Mr. Skullduggery Pleasant. Shocker. Well, who on earth is that? Asked Beryl, irritated. He sounds like Fergus, what does he sound like? He sounds like a weirdo, Fergus said, glaring at Fedgwick. He's not a weirdo, is he? I really couldn't say, Fedgwick answered, his paltry excuse for a smile failing miserably under the glare he was getting from Fergus and Beryl. But I'm sure he'll be along soon. Fergus frowned, narrowing his beady eyes as much as was possible. How are you sure? Fedgwick faltered, unable to offer a reason, and then the door opened and the man in the tan overcoat entered the room. Sorry I'm late, he said, closing the door behind him. It was unavoidable, I'm afraid. Everyone in the room stared at him, stared at the scarf and the gloves and the sunglasses and the wild fuzzy hair. It was a glorious day outside, certainly not the kind of weather to be wrapped up like this. Stephanie looked closer at the hair. From this distance, it didn't even seem real. The solicitor cleared his throat. Are you Skullduggery Pleasant? At your service, the man said. Stephanie could listen to that voice all day. Her mother, uncertain as she was, had smiled her greetings, but her father was looking at him with an expression of wariness she had never seen on his face before. After a moment, the expression left him and he nodded politely and looked back to Mr. Fedgwick. Fergus and Beryl were still staring. Do you have something wrong with your face? Beryl asked. Fedgwick cleared his throat again. Okay then, let's get down to business now that we're all here. Excellent, good. This, of course, being the last will and testament of Gordon Edgley, revised last almost 1 year ago. Gordon has been a client of mine for the past 20 years, and in that time I got to know him well, so let me pass on to you his family and friend, my deepest... Yes, Fergus interrupted, waving his hand in the air. Can we just skip this part? We're already running behind schedule. Can we get to the part where we get stuff? Who gets the house and who gets the villa? Who gets the fortune? Beryl asked, leaning forward in her seat. The royalties, Fergus said. Who gets the royalties from the books? Stephanie glanced at Skullduggery Pleasant from the corner of her eye. He was standing back against the wall, hands in his pockets, looking at the solicitor. Well, he seemed to be looking at the solicitor. With those sunglasses, he could have been looking anywhere. She returned her gaze to Fedgwick as he picked up a page from his desk and read from it. To my brother Fergus and his beautiful wife Beryl, he read, and Stephanie did her best to hide a grin. I leave my car and my boat and a gift. Fergus and Beryl blinked. His car, Fergus said. His boat. Why would he leave me his boat? You hate the water, Beryl said, anger rising in her voice. You get seasick. I do get seasick, Fergus snapped. And he knew that. And we already have a car, Beryl said. And we already have a car, Fergus repeated. Beryl was sitting so far up in her chair that she was almost on the desk. This gift, she said, her voice low and threatening, is it the fortune? Mr. Fedgwick coughed nervously and took a small box from his desk drawer and slid it towards them. They looked at this box. They looked some more. They both reached for it at the same time, and Stephanie watched them slap at each other's hands until Beryl snatched it off the desk and tore the lid open. What is it? Fergus asked in a small voice. Is it a key to a safety deposit box? Is it an account number? What is it? Wife, what is it? All colour had drained from Beryl's face, and her hands were shaking. She blinked hard to keep tears away. Then she turned the box for everyone to see, and everyone saw the brooch, about the size of a drinks coaster, nestled in the plush cushion. Fergus stared at it. It doesn't even have any jewels on it, Beryl said, her voice strangled. Fergus opened his mouth wide like a startled fish and turned to Fedgwick. What else do we get? He asked, panicking. Mr. Fedgwick tried another smile. Your brother's love? Stephanie heard a high-pitched whine, and it took her a moment to realize it was coming from Beryl. Fedgwick returned his attention to the will, trying to ignore the horrified looks he was getting from Fergus and his wife. To my good friend and guide, Skullduggery Pleasant, I leave the following advice. Your path is your own, and I have no wish to sway you, But sometimes the greatest enemy we can face is ourselves, and the greatest battle is against the darkness within. There is a storm coming, and sometimes the key to safe harbor is hidden from us, and sometimes it is right before our eyes. Stephanie joined in with everyone else as they stared at Mr. Pleasant. She had known there was something different about him. She had known it the first moment she saw him. There was something exotic, something mysterious, something dangerous. For his part, his head dipped lower, and that was the only reaction he gave. He offered no explanation as to what Gordon's message had been. Fergus patted his wife's knee. See, Beryl, a car, a boat, a brooch, it's not that bad. He could have given us some stupid advice. Oh, shut up, will you? Beryl snarled, and Fergus recoiled in his chair. Mr. Fedgwick read on. To my other brother, Desmond, the lucky one of the family, I leave to you your wife. I think you might like her. Stephanie saw her parents clasp each other's hands and smile sadly. So now that you've successfully stolen my girlfriend, maybe you'd like to take her to my villa in France, which I am also leaving to you. They get the villa? Beryl cried, jumping to her feet. Beryl, Fergus said, please. Do you know how much that villa is worth? Beryl continued, looking like she might lunge at Stephanie's parents. We get a brooch. They get a villa. There are only 3 of them. We've got Carol and Crystal. We have more. We could do with the extra space. Why do they deserve the villa? She thrust the box towards them. Swap! Mrs. Edgley, please retake your seat or we shall be unable to continue, Mr. Fedgwick said, and eventually, after much bug-eyed glaring, Beryl sat down. This is reminding me so much if you've ever seen Knives Out. Isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Fedgwick said, looking like he had had quite enough excitement for one day. He licked his lips, adjusted his glasses, and peered again at the will. If there is one regret that I have had in my life, it is that I have never fathered any children. There are times when I look at what Fergus and Beryl have produced and I consider myself fortunate. But there are also times when it breaks my heart. And so finally, to my niece, Stephanie. Stephanie's eyes widened. What? She was getting something. Leaving the villa to her parents wasn't enough for Gordon. Fedgwick continued reading. The world is bigger than you know and scarier than you might imagine. The only currency worth anything is being true to yourself, and the only goal worth seeking is finding out who you truly are. She could feel Fergus and Beryl glaring at her, and she did her best to ignore them. Make your parents proud and make them glad to have you living under their roof, because I leave to you my property and possessions, my assets and my royalties to be inherited on the day you turn 18. I'd just like to take this opportunity to say that, in my own way, I love you all, even those I don't particularly like. That's you, Beryl. Fedgwick took off his spectacles and looked up. Stephanie became aware that everyone was staring at her, and she hadn't a clue as to what she was supposed to say. Fergus was again doing his startled fish impression, and Beryl was pointing one long, bony finger at her, trying to speak but failing. Her parents were looking at her in stunned surprise. Only Skullduggery Pleasant moved, walking behind her and gently touching her arm. Congratulations, he said, and moved on towards the door. As soon as it clicked shut behind him, Beryl found her voice. Ha! She screamed. Ha! I hope you're liking the book so far because it only gets better from here. Chapter 3. Huh?
What's everyone saying?
Oh, Hulda says, I know a very nice Fergus. See, I think Fergus is not as bad. Beryl, I don't know a nice Beryl, I'm sorry. Luna's adding
don't know any Beryl.
No. Luna's adding to the ambiance. I don't know where she is now. Oh, they're both asleep on the sofa. Oh, that's kind of cute. Okay. Chapter 3. Little Girl All Alone. That afternoon, Stephanie and her mother took the 15-minute drive from Haggard to Gordon's estate. Her mum opened the front door and stepped back. Owner of the house goes first, she said with a little smile and a bow, and Stephanie stepped inside. She wasn't thinking of this house as her property. The idea was too big, too silly. Even if her parents were technically the custodians until she turned 18, how could she own a house? How many other 12-year-old kids owned houses? No, it was too silly an idea. Too far-fetched. Too crazy. Exactly the kind of thing that Gordon would have thought made perfect sense. The house was big and quiet and empty as they walked through it. Everything seemed new to her now, and Stephanie found herself reacting differently to the furniture and carpets and paintings. Did she like it? Did she agree with this colour or that fabric? One thing that had to be said for Gordon, he had a good eye. Stephanie's mother said that there was very little she would change if she had to. Some of the paintings were a little too unnerving for her taste, maybe, but on the whole, the furnishings were elegant and understated, exuding an air of distinction that befitted a house of this stature. They hadn't decided what they were going to do with the house. Any decision was left up to Stephanie, but her parents still had the villa to consider. Owning 3 houses between them seemed a bit much. Her father had suggested selling the villa, but her mother hated the thought of letting go of a place so idyllic. They had also talked about Stephanie's education, and she knew that conversation was far from over. The moment they had left Mr. Fedgwick's office, they warned her not to let all of this go to her head. Recent events, they had said, should not mean that she could stop studying, stop planning for college. She needed to be independent, they said. She needed to make it on her own. Stephanie had let them talk and nodded occasionally and muttered an agreement where an agreement was appropriate. She didn't bother to explain that she needed college. She needed to find her own way in the world because she knew that if she didn't, she'd never escape Haggard. She wasn't about to throw her future away simply because she'd come into some money. She and her mother spent so long looking around the ground floor that by the time that they got to the bottom of the stairs, it was already 5 o'clock. With their exploring done for the day, they locked up and walked to the car. The first few drops of rain splattered against the windscreen as they got in. Stephanie clicked her seatbelt closed, and her mother turned the key in the ignition. The car spluttered a bit, groaned a little, and then shut up altogether. Stephanie's mother looked at her. Uh-oh. They both got out and opened the bonnet. Well, her mother said, looking at the engine, at least that's still there. Do you know anything about engines? Stephanie asked. That's why I have a husband, so I don't have to. Engines and shelves, that's why man was invented. Stephanie made a mental note to learn about engines before she turned 18. She wasn't too fussed about shelves. Her mum dug her mobile phone out of her bag and called Stephanie's dad, but he was busy on site and there was no way he could get to them before nightfall. They went back inside the house and her mother called a mechanic and they spent 3/4 of an hour waiting for him to arrive. The sky was grey and angry and the rain was falling hard. Hiccups. By the time the truck appeared around the corner. It splashed through puddles on its way up to the long drive, and Stephanie's mum pulled her jacket over her head and ran out to meet it. Stephanie could see a great big dog in the cab of the truck, looking on as the mechanic got out to examine their car. After a few minutes, her mother ran back inside, thoroughly drenched. Oh, he can't fix it here, she said, wringing out her jacket on the porch. So he's going to tow it to the garage. It shouldn't take too long to fix. Will there be room for both of us in the truck? You can sit on my knee, Mum, or I can sit on your knee, whatever works. Can I stay here? Her mother looked at her. On your own? Please, you just said it won't take long, and I'd like to have another look around just on my own. I don't know, Steph. Please, I've stayed on my own before. I won't break anything, I swear. Her mother laughed. Okay, fine. I shouldn't be any more than an hour, okay? An hour and a half at the most. Her mother gave her a quick kiss on the cheek. Call me if you need anything. She ran back outside and jumped in the cab next to the dog, who proceeded to slobber all over her face. Stephanie watched their car being towed off into the distance, and then it vanished from sight. She did a little more exploring now that she was on her own. She climbed the stairs and went straight to Gordon's study. His publisher, Seamus T. Steep of Arclight Books, had phoned them earlier that day, passing on his condolences and inquiring about the state of Gordon's last book. Her mother had told him that they'd find out if Gordon had completed it, and if he had, they'd send it on. Mr. Steep was very keen to get the book on the shelves, certain that it would crash onto the bestseller list and stay there for a long time. Dead writers sell, he had said, like he approved of Gordon's clever marketing ploy. Stephanie opened the desk drawer and found the manuscript on a neat stack. She pulled it out carefully and lay it on the desktop, careful not to smudge the paper. The first page held the title, Nothing More, in bold lettering, and the darkness reigned upon them. The manuscript was thick and heavy, like all of Gordon's books. She'd read most of them, and the odd splash of pretension aside, had quite enjoyed his work. His stories tended to be about people who could do astonishing and wonderful things, and the strange and terrible events that invariably led up to their bizarre and horrible deaths. She noticed the way he would set up a strong and noble hero, and over the course of the book, systematically subject this hero to brutal punishment in a bid to strip away all of his arrogance and certainty, so that by the end he was humbled and had learned a good lesson. And then Gordon killed him off, usually in the most undignified way possible. That sounds like you and me.
Alright, so all of us with our Aussies. Here, this is my precious
A true
child.
writer I can get behind. Stephanie could almost hear Gordon laughing with mischievous glee as she'd read. She lifted the title page and carefully laid it face down on the desk behind the manuscript. She started reading. She didn't mean to spend long at it, but soon she was devouring every word, oblivious to the creaking old house and the rain outside. Her mobile phone rang, making her jump. She had been reading for 2 hours. She pressed the answer button and held it to her ear. Hi, sweetie, came her mum's voice. Everything okay? Yes, Stephanie answered. Just reading. You're not reading one of Gordon's books, are you, Steph? He writes about horrible monsters and scary stuff and bad people doing worse things. It'll give you nightmares. No, Mum, I'm reading the dictionary. Even the brief silence from the other end of the phone was skeptical. The dictionary, her mother said. Really? Yeah, Stephanie said. Did you know that popple is a word? You are stranger than your father, do you know that? I suspected as much. So, is the car fixed yet? No, and that's why I'm calling. They can't get it going, and the road up to you is flooded. I'm going to get a taxi up as far as it'll go, and then I'll see if I can find some way around on foot. It's going to be another 2 hours at least. Stephanie sensed an opportunity. Ever since she was a child, she had much preferred her own company to the company of others, and it occurred to her that she had never spent a whole night without her parents nearby. A small taste of freedom, and it almost tingled on her tongue. Mum, it's fine. You don't have to. I'm okay here. There's no way I'm leaving you in a strange house by yourself. It's not a strange house. It's Gordon's, and it's fine. There's no point in you trying to get here tonight. It's lashing rain. Sweetie, it won't take me long. It'll take you ages. Where is it flooded? Her mother paused. At the bridge. The bridge! And you want to walk from the bridge to here? If I speed walk, Mum, don't be silly. Get Dad to pick you up. Are you sure? I like it here, really. Okay? Well, okay, her mother said reluctantly. I'll be over first thing in the morning to pick you up, all right? And I saw some food in the cupboard, so if you're hungry, you can make yourself something. Okay, I'll see you tomorrow then. Call us if you need anything, or if you just want some company. I will. Night, Mum. I love you. I know. Stephanie hung up and grinned. She slipped the phone back into her jacket and put her feet up on the desk, relaxing back into the chair, and went back to reading. When she looked up again, she was surprised to find that it was almost midnight and the rain had stopped. If she were home right now, she'd be in bed. She blinked, her eyes sore, stood up from the desk and went downstairs to the kitchen. For all his wealth and success and extravagant tastes, she was thankful that when it came to food, Gordon was a pretty standard guy. The bread was stale and the fruit was a bit too ripe, but there were biscuits and there was cereal, and the milk in the fridge was still good for one more day. Stephanie made herself a snack and wandered into the living room where she flicked on the TV. She sat on the couch and was just getting comfy when the house phone rang. She looked at it, resting there on the table at her elbow. Who would be calling? Anyone who knew Gordon had died wouldn't be calling because they'd known he died, and she didn't really want to be the one to tell anyone who didn't know. It could be her parents, but then why didn't they just call her phone? Figuring as the new owner of the house, it was her job to answer her own phone, Stephanie picked it up and held it to her ear. Hello? Silence. Hello? Stephanie repeated. Who is this? Came a man's voice. I'm sorry, Stephanie said. Who do you want to speak to? Who is this? Responded the voice, more irritably this time. If you're looking for Gordon Edgley, Stephanie said, I'm afraid that I know Edgley's dead, snapped the man. Who are you? Your name? Stephanie hesitated. Why do you want to know? She asked. What are you doing in that house? Why are you in his house? If you want to call back tomorrow, I don't want to, all right? Listen to me, girlie. If you mess up my master's plans, he'll be very displeased, and he is not a man you want to displease. You got that? Now, tell me who you are. Stephanie realized her hands were shaking. She forced herself to calm down and quickly found anger replacing her nervousness. My name's none of your business, she said. If you want to talk to someone, call back tomorrow at a reasonable hour. You don't talk to me like that, the man hissed. Good night, Stephanie said firmly. You do not talk to me like... But Stephanie was already putting the phone down. Suddenly, the idea of spending the whole night here wasn't as appealing as it first sounded. She considered calling her parents, then scolded herself for being so childish. No need to worry them, she thought to herself. No need to worry them about something so... Someone pounded on the front door. Open up, came the man's voice between the pounding. Stephanie got to her feet, staring through the hall beyond the living room. She could see a dark shape behind the frosted glass around the front door. Open the damn door! Stephanie backed up to the fireplace, her heart pounding in her chest. He knew she was in here. There was no use pretending that she wasn't. But maybe if she stayed really quiet, he'd give up and go away. She heard him cursing, and the pounding grew so heavy that the front door rattled under the blows. Leave me alone, Stephanie shouted. Open the door! No, she shouted back. She liked shouting. It disguised her fear. I'm calling the police. I'm calling the police right now. The pounding stopped immediately, and Stephanie saw the shape move away from the door. Was that it? Had she scared him away? She thought of the back door. Was it locked? Of course it was locked. It had to be locked. But she wasn't sure. She wasn't certain. She grabbed a poker from the fireplace and was reaching for the phone when she heard a knock on the window beside her. She cried out and jumped back. The curtains were open and outside the window was pitch black. She couldn't see a thing. Are you alone in there? Came the voice. It was teasing now.
playing with her. "Go away," she said loudly, holding up the poker so that he could see it. She heard the man laugh. "What are you going to do with that?" he said. "I'll break your head open with it," Stephanie shouted at him, fear and fury bubbling up inside her. She heard him laugh again. "I just want to come in," he said. "Open the door for me, won't you? Let me come in." "The police are on their way," she said. "You're a liar." Still, she could see nothing beyond the glass, and he could see everything. She moved to the phone, snatching it from its cradle. "Don't do that," came the voice. I'm calling the police." "The road's closed, girlie. You call them, I'll break down that door and I'll kill you hours before they get here." Fear became terror, and Stephanie froze. She was going to cry. She could feel it, the tears welling up inside her. She hadn't cried in years. "What do you want?" she said to the darkness. "Why do you want to come in?" "It's got nothing to do with me, girlie. I've just been sent to pick something up. Let me in. I'll look around, get what I came here for, and leave. I won't harm a pretty little hair on your pretty little head. I promise. Now, you just open that door right this second." Stephanie gripped the poker in both hands and shook her head. She was crying now, tears rolling down her cheeks. "No," she said. She screamed as a fist smashed through the window, showering the carpet with glass. She stumbled back as the man started climbing in, glaring at her with blazing eyes, unmindful of the glass that cut into him. The moment one foot touched the floor inside the house, Stephanie was bolting out the room, over to the front door, fumbling at the lock. Strong hands grabbed her from behind. She screamed again, and she was lifted off her feet and carried backwards. She kicked out, slamming a heel into his shin. The man grunted and let go, and Stephanie twisted, trying to swing the poker into his face, but he caught it and pulled it from her grasp. One hand went to her throat, and Stephanie gagged, unable to breathe, as the man forced her back into the living room. He pushed her into an armchair and leant over her, and no matter how hard she tried, she could not break his grip. "Now then," the man said, his mouth contorting into a sneer, "why don't you just give me the key, little girlie?" And that's when the front door was flung off its hinges and Skullduggery Pleasant burst into the house. The man cursed and released Stephanie and swung the poker, but Skullduggery moved straight to him and hit him so hard Stephanie thought the man's head might come off. He hit the ground and tumbled backwards, but rolled to his feet as Skullduggery moved in again. The man launched himself forward. They both collided and went backwards over the couch, and Skullduggery lost his hat. Stephanie saw a flash of white above the scarf. They got to their feet, grappling, and the man swung a punch that knocked Skullduggery's sunglasses to the other side of the room. Skullduggery responded by moving in low, grabbing the man around the waist and twisting his hip into him. The man was flipped to the floor, hard. He cursed a little more, then remembered Stephanie and made for her. Stephanie leapt out of the chair, but before he could reach her, Skullduggery was there, kicking the man's legs out from underneath him. The man hit a small coffee table with his chin, and he howled in pain. "You think you can stop me?" he screamed as he tried to stand. His knees seemed shaky. "Do you know who I am?" "Haven't the foggiest," Skullduggery said. The man spat blood and grinned defiantly. "Well, I know about you," he said. "My master told me all about you, detective, and you're going to have to do a lot more than that to stop me." Skullduggery shrugged, and Stephanie watched in amazement as a ball of fire flared in his hand, and he hurled it, and the man was suddenly covered in flame. But instead of screaming, the man tilted his head back and roared with laughter. The fire may have engulfed him, but it wasn't burning him. "More!" he laughed. "Give me more!" "If you insist." And then Skullduggery took an old-fashioned revolver from his jacket and fired, the gun backing slightly with the recoil. The bullet hit the man in the shoulder, and he screamed, and he tried to run and tripped. He scrambled for the doorway, ducking and dodging lest he get shot again, the flames obstructing his vision, so much that he hit a wall on his way out. And then he was gone. Stephanie stared at the door, trying to make sense of the impossible. Well, Skullduggery said, that's something you don't see every day. She turned. When his hat came off, his hair had come off too. In the confusion, all she had seen was a chalk-white scalp, so she turned, expecting to see a bald albino, maybe? But no. With his sunglasses gone and his scarf hanging down, there was no denying the fact that he had no flesh, he had no skin, he had no eyes, and he had no face. All he had was a skull for a head. I love these books! They're just so nostalgic. And he's just so cool and so stupid at the same time. You'll see. I hope you're enjoying this, by the way. Chapter 4 is called The Secret War. You haven't read this bit yet, have you?
No.
Here we go then. Skullduggery put his gun away and walked out to the hall. He peered out into the night. Satisfied that there were no human fireballs lurking anywhere nearby, he came back inside and picked the door off the ground, grunting with the effort. He maneuvered it back to where it belonged, leaving it leaning against the doorway. Then he shrugged and came back in the living room, where Stephanie was still standing and staring at him. Sorry about the door, he said. Stephanie stared. I'll pay to get it fixed. Stephanie stared. Still a good door, you know. Sturdy. When he realized that Stephanie was in no condition to do anything but stare, he shrugged again and took off his coat, folded it neatly and draped it over the back of a chair. He went to the broken window and started picking up the shards of glass. Now that he didn't have his coat on, Stephanie could truly appreciate how thin he really was. His suit, well tailored though it was, hung off him, giving it a shapeless quality. She watched him collect the broken glass and saw a flash of bone between his shirt sleeve and glove. He stood, looking back at her. Where should I put all this glass? I don't know, Stephanie said in a quiet voice. You're a skeleton. I am indeed, he said. Gordon used to keep a wheelie bin at the back door. Shall I put it in that? Stephanie nodded. Yeah, okay, she said simply, and watched Skullduggery carry an armful of glass shards out of the room. All her life, she had longed for something else, for something to take her out of the humdrum world she knew. And now that it looked like it might actually happen, she didn't have one clue what to do. Questions were tripping over themselves in her head, each one vying to be the one that would ask first. So many of them. Skullduggery came back in and she asked the first question. Did you find it all right? I did, yes. It's where he always kept it. Okay, then. If questions were people, she felt that they'd all be staring at her now in disbelief. She struggled to form coherent thoughts. Did you tell him your name? Skullduggery was asking. What? Your name. Did you tell him? No. Good. You know something's true name, you have power over it. But even a given name, even Stephanie, that would have been enough to do it. To do what? To give him some influence over you, to get you to do what he asked. If he had your name and he knew what to do with it, sometimes that's all it takes. That's a scary thought now, isn't it? What's going on? Stephanie asked. Who was he? What did he want? Just, who are you? I'm me, Skullduggery said, picking up his hat and wig and placing them on a nearby table. As for him, I don't know who that was. Never seen him before in my life. You shot him. That's right. And you threw fire at him. Yes, I did. Stephanie's legs felt weak and her head felt light. Mr. Pleasant, you're a skeleton. Ah, yes, back to the crux of the matter. Yes, I am, as you say, a skeleton. I have been one for a few years now. Am I going mad? I hope not. So you're real. You actually exist. Presumably. You mean you're not sure if you exist or not? I'm fairly certain. I mean, I could be wrong. I could be some ghastly hallucination or a figment of my imagination. You might be a figment of your own imagination. Stranger things have happened, and do with alarming regularity. This is too weird. Skullduggery put his gloved hands in his pockets and cocked his head. He had no eyeballs, so it was hard to tell if he was looking at her or not. You know, I met your uncle under similar circumstances. Well, kind of similar, but he was drunk, and we were in a bar, and he had vomited on my shoes. So I suppose the actual circumstances aren't overly similar, but both events included a meeting, so my point is, he was having some trouble, and I was there to lend a hand, and we became good friends after that. Good friends. His head tilted. You look like you might faint. Stephanie nodded slowly. I've never fainted before, but I think you might be right. Do you want me to catch you if you fall, or if you wouldn't mind? Oh, no problem at all. Thank you. Stephanie gave him a weak smile, and the darkness clouded her vision, and she felt herself falling, and the last thing she saw was Skullduggery Pleasant darting across the room to catch her. Stephanie awoke on the couch with a blanket over her. The room was dark, lit only by 2 lamps in opposite corners. She looked over at the broken window, saw that it was now boarded up. She heard a hammering from the hall, and when she felt strong enough to stand, she slowly rose and walked out of the living room. Skullduggery Pleasant was trying to hang the door back on its hinges. He had his shirt sleeve rolled up on his left forearm. Ulna, Stephanie corrected herself, proving that her first year of biology class had not gone to waste. Or was it radius? Or both? She heard him mutter, and then he noticed her and nodded brightly. Ah, you're up. You fixed the window. Well, covered it up. Gordon had a few pieces of timber at the back, so I did what I could. Not having the same luck with the door, though. I find it much easier to blast them off than put them back on. How are you feeling? I'm okay, Stephanie said. A cup of hot tea, that's what you need. Lots of sugar. He abandoned the door and guided her to the kitchen. She sat at the table whilst he boiled the water. Hungry? He asked when it had boiled, but she shook her head. Milk? She nodded. He added milk and spoonfuls of sugar, gave the tea a quick stir, and put the cup on the table in front of her. She took a sip. It was hot, but nice. Thank you, Stephanie said, and he gave a little shrug. It was hard discerning some of his gestures without a face to go by, but she took the shrug to mean think nothing of it. Was it magic, with the fire and blasting the door? Yes, it was. She peered closer. How can you talk? Sorry? How can you talk? You move your mouth when you speak, but you've got no tongue, you've got no lips, you've got no vocal cords. I mean, I know what skeletons look like. I've seen diagrams and models and stuff, and the only thing that hold them together are flesh and skin and ligaments, so why don't you just fall apart? He gave another shrug, both shoulders this time. Well, that's magic too. She looked at him. Magic's pretty handy. Yes, magic is. And what about, nerve endings? Can you feel pain? I can, but that's not a bad thing. Pain lets you know when you're alive, after all. And are you alive? Well, technically no, but... She peered into his empty eye sockets. Do you have a brain? He laughed. I don't have a brain. I don't have any organs, but I have a consciousness. He started clearing away the sugar and the milk. To be honest with you, it's not even my head. What? It's not. They ran away with my skull. I won this one in a poker game. That's not even yours. How does it feel? It'll do. It'll do until I finally get around to getting my own head back. You look fairly disgusted. Doesn't it feel weird? It'd be like wearing someone else's socks. You get used to it. What happened to you? She asked. Were you born like this? No, I was born perfectly normal. Skin, organs, the whole shebang. Even had a face that wasn't too bad to look at, if I do say so myself. So, what happened? Skullduggery leaned against the worktop, arms folded across his chest. I got into magic. Back when I was, for want of a better term, alive, there were some pretty nasty people around. The world was seeing a darkness it might never have recovered from. It was a war, you see. A secret war, but war nonetheless. There was a sorcerer, malevolent, worse than any of the others, and he had himself an army. and those of us who refused to fall behind him found ourselves standing up against him. And we were winning. Eventually, after years of fighting this little war of ours, we were actually winning. His support was crumbling, his influence was fading, and he was staring defeat in the face. So he ordered one last, desperate strike against all the leaders on our side. Stephanie stared at him, lost in his voice. I went up against his right-hand man who had laid out a wickedly exquisite trap. I didn't suspect a thing until it was too late. So I died. He killed me. The 23rd of October it was when my heart stopped beating. Once I was dead, they stuck my body up on a pike and burned it for all to see. They used me as a warning. They used the bodies of all of the leaders they had killed as warnings. And to my utter horror, it worked. What do you mean? The tide turned. Our side started losing ground. Malevolent got stronger. It was more than I could stand. So I came back. You just came back? It's complicated. When I died, I never moved on. Something was holding me here, making me watch. I'd never heard of it happening before that, and I haven't heard of it happening since, but it happened to me. So when it got too much, I woke up a bag of bones. Literally. They had gathered up my bones and put them in a bag and thrown the bag into a river. So that was a marvelous new experience right there. Then what happened? I put myself back together, which was rather painful, then climbed out of the river and rejoined the fight. And in the end, we won. We finally won. So, with Malevolent defeated, I quit that whole scene and stuck out on my own for the first time in a few hundred years. Stephanie blinked. Few hundred? It was a long war. That man, he called you detective. He obviously knows me by reputation, Skullduggery said, standing a little straighter. I solve mysteries now. Really? I'm quite good at it too. So what, you're tracking down your lead? No, it's tracking down your head. Skullduggery looked at her. If he had eyelids, he might well be blinking. It would be nice to have back, sure, but so you don't need it, like, so you can rest in peace. No, not really. Why did they take it? Was that another warning? Oh, no, Skullduggery said with a little laugh. No, they didn't take it. I was sleeping about 10 or 15 years ago, and these little goblin things ran up and nicked it right off my spinal column. Didn't notice it was gone till the next morning. Stephanie frowned. And you didn't feel that? Well, like I said, I was asleep. Meditating, I suppose you'd call it. I can't see, hear, or feel anything when I'm meditating. Have you tried it? No. It's very relaxing. I think you'll like it. I'm sorry, I'm still stuck on you losing your head. I didn't lose it, he said defensively. It was stolen. Stephanie was feeling stronger now. She couldn't believe that she'd fainted. Fainted was such an old woman thing to do. She glanced up at Skullduggery. You've had a very unusual life, haven't you? I suppose I have. Not over yet, though. Well, technically it is, but is there anything you miss? About what? About living. Compared to how long I've been like this, I was only technically alive for a blink of an eye. Can't really remember enough about having a beating heart in my chest to miss it. So there's nothing you miss? I suppose I miss hair. I miss how it was and how it was there on top of my head. I suppose I miss my hair. He took out his pocket watch and his head jerked back. Wow, look at the time. I've got to go, Stephanie. Go? Go where? Things to do, I'm afraid. Number 1 is finding out why that nice gentleman was sent here. Number 2 is finding out who sent him. You can't leave me alone, she said, following him into the living room. Yes, he corrected, I can. You'll be perfectly safe. The front door's off. Well, yes, you'll be perfectly safe as long as they don't come through the front door. He pulled on his coat, but she snatched his hat away. Are you taking my hat hostage? He asked doubtfully. You're either staying here to make sure no one else attacks me, or you're taking me with you. Skullduggery froze. That, he said eventually, wouldn't be too safe for you. Neither would being left here on my own. But you can hide, he said, gesturing around the house. There's so many places to hide. I'm sure there's plenty of good solid wardrobes your size, even under a bed. You'd be surprised how many people don't check under beds these days. Mr. Pleasant, Skullduggery, please. Skullduggery, you saved my life tonight. Are you going to undo all that effort by leaving me here so someone else can come along and just kill me? That's a very defeatist attitude you've got there. I once knew a fellow, a little older than you. He wanted to join me in my adventures, wanted to solve mysteries that beggared belief. He kept asking, kept on at me about it. He finally proved himself after a long time, and we became partners. And did you go on to have lots of exciting adventures? I did. He didn't. He died on our very first case together. Horrible death, messy too, lots of flaying around. Well, I don't plan on dying anytime soon, and I've got something he didn't. And that is your hat. Take me with you, or I'll stand on it. Skullduggery looked at her with his big hollow eye sockets, then held out his hand for his hat. Don't say I didn't warn you.
this would make the most amazing. You know the studio that did Coraline?
Stop motion film. Don't
It would
even.
be amazing.
I would cry. I would cry real tears.
Ooh.
They do have like the rights for the book purchased. It's just been in the work for so long, and every time the damn author like tweets, everyone's just like, but the film.
Wait, so did he did this come out before Harry Potter?
No, Harry Potter was like the late 90s, wasn't it?
I don't know.
I feel like it was, and then like the first book was maybe like late 90s, and then this was like early 2000s.
Okay. Sorcerer War.
It's so good. I think it's better than Harry Potter. Just saying.
The writing style's great.
Yeah, it's really fun. Oh, just lost my
That's a really fun cover too.
It is. I haven't had this cover before. So I have like these books back at my parents' house, and they're very old and threadbare. And they used to have like highlighter, the first one had like highlighter orange edges, and the second one had like highlighter green edges, and they're slightly different covers, but I think it looks like the same cover artist, but the cover artist has obviously done updated covers, and they just look fucking sick. I could show you. And yeah, these are all the characters of the book. Show Kitty.
So cool.
As we get to the characters, I'll tell you who's on the book. Oh, I've got blurry now. I love it when that happens. I guess you don't really need to see me to hear me, but it would help. Why will it not?
Maybe it could go out of frame and then come back in.
Oh, here we go. Okay. Oh, okay.
Yay.
Right.
I can see you fine.
Oh, okay. Chapter 5. Meeting China Sorrows. Skullduggery Pleasant's car was a 1954 Bentley R-Type Continental, one of only 208 ever made, a car that housed a 6-cylinder, 4.5-litre engine and was retrofitted with a central locking, climate control, satellite navigation, and a host of other modern conveniences. Skullduggery told Stephanie all of this when she asked. She'd have been happy with "It's a Bentley." They left Gordon's land via a back road at the rear of the estate to avoid the flooding, a road that Stephanie hadn't even noticed until they were on it. Skullduggery told her that he was a regular visitor here and knew all the little nooks and crannies. They passed a sign for Haggard, and she thought about asking him to drop her home, but quickly banished that idea from her head. If she went home now, she'd be turning her back on everything she'd just seen. She needed to know more. She needed to see more. "Where are we going?" she asked as they drove on. "Into the city. I've got a meeting with an old friend. She might be able to help shed some light on recent events." "Why were you at the house?" I've got hiccups now. I think when I'm reading, I'm like inhaling too much air. Now I've got hiccups, so apologies.
Drink the water and plug it up.
No. Why were you at the house? Sorry. Tonight. Not that I'm not grateful, but how come you happen to be nearby? Ah, he said, nodding. Yes, I can see how that question would arise. So are you going to answer it? That's unlikely. Well, why not? He glanced at her, or at least he turned his head a fraction. The less you know about all this, the better. You're a perfectly normal young lady, and after tonight you're going to return to your perfectly normal life. It wouldn't do for you to get too involved in this. But I am involved. But we can limit that involvement. But I don't want to limit that involvement. But it's what's best for you. But I don't want that. But it might. Don't start another sentence with but. Right. Sorry. You can't expect me to forget about all of this. I've seen magic and fire and you, and I've learnt about wars that they don't tell us about in school. I've seen a world I never even knew existed. Don't you want to go back to that world? It's safer there. That's not where I belong. Skullduggery turned his whole head to her and cocked it at an angle. Funny, when I first met your uncle, that's what he said too. The things he wrote about, Stephanie said, the idea just dawning on her. Are they true? His books? No, not a one. Oh. They're more inspired by true stories, really. He just changed them enough so he wouldn't insult anyone and get hunted down and killed. Your uncle was a good man, he really was. We solved many mysteries together. Really? Oh, yes. You should have been proud to have an uncle like him. Of course, he got me into 100 fights because I'd bring him somewhere and he wouldn't stop pestering people, but fun times, fun times. They drove on until they saw the lights of the city looming ahead. Soon the darkness that surrounded the car was replaced by an orange haze that reflected off the wet roads. The city was quiet and still, the streets almost empty. They pulled into a small outdoor car park, and Skullduggery switched off the engine and looked at Stephanie. Okay then, you wait here. Right. He got out. 2 seconds passed, but Stephanie hadn't tagged along just to wait on the sidelines. She needed to see what other surprises the world had in store for her. She got out, and Skullduggery looked at her. Stephanie, I'm not altogether sure you're respecting my authority. No, I'm not. I see. Okay then. He put on his hat and wrapped his scarf around his jaw, but did without the wig and the sunglasses. He clicked his keyring, and the car beeped and the doors locked. That's it. He looked up. Sorry? Aren't you afraid it might get stolen? We're not exactly in a good part of town. It's got a car alarm. Don't you, cast a spell or something to keep it safe? No, it's a pretty good car alarm. He started walking. She hurried to keep up. Do you cast spells, then? Sometimes. I try not to depend on magic these days. I try to get on by with what's up here. He tapped his head. There's empty space up there. Well, yes, Skullduggery said irritably, but you know what I mean. What else can you do? Sorry? With magic. Show me something. If Skullduggery had eyebrows, they would most likely be arched. What, a living skeleton isn't enough for you? You want more? Yes, Stephanie said. Give me a tutorial. He shrugged. Well, I suppose it couldn't hurt. There are 2 types of mages, or sorcerers. Adept practice one branch of magic, elementals practice another. Adepts are more aggressive, their techniques are more immediately powerful. In contrast, an elemental, such as myself, chooses the quieter course and works on mastering their command of the elements. Command of the elements? Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration. We don't command them as such, we manipulate them, we influence them. Like what? Like earth, wind, water, and fire, yes. So show me. Skullduggery tilted his head a little to the right, and she could hear the good humour in his voice. Very well, he said, and held up his open hand in front of her. She frowned, feeling a little bit chilly, and then she became aware of a droplet of water running down her face. In an instant, her hair was drenched like she had just surfaced from a dive. How did you do that? She asked, shaking her head, flinging drops of water away from her. You tell me, Skullduggery answered. I don't know. You did something to the moisture in the air? He looked down at her. Very good, he said, impressed. The first element, water, we can't part the Red Sea or anything like that, but we have a little influence with it. Show me fire again, Stephanie said eagerly. Skullduggery snapped his gloved fingers and sparks flew, and he curled his hand and the sparks grew to flame, and he held that ball of flame in his palm as they walked. The flame intensified and Stephanie could feel her hair drying. Wow, she said. Wow, indeed, Skullduggery responded, and thrust his hand out, sending the ball of fire shooting through the air. It burned out as it arced the night sky and faded to nothing. What about Earth? Stephanie asked, but Skullduggery shook his head. You don't want to see that, and hopefully you'll never have to. The Earth power is purely defensive and purely for use as a last resort. So what's the most powerful? Is it fire? That's the flashiest, the one that gets all the wows, but you'd be surprised what little air can do if you displace it properly. Displaced air doesn't just disappear, it needs somewhere to be displaced to. Can I see? They reached the edge of the car park and passed the low wall that encircled it. Skullduggery flexed his fingers and suddenly splayed his hand, snapping his palm towards the wall. The air rippled and the bricks exploded outwards. Stephanie stared at the brand new hole in the wall. That, she said, is so cool. They walked on, Stephanie glancing back at the wall every so often. What about adepts, then? What can they do? I knew a fellow a few years ago who could read minds. I met this woman once who could change her shape, become anyone, right in front of your eyes. So who's stronger? Stephanie asked. An elemental or an adept? Depends on the mage. An adept could have so many tricks up his sleeve, so many different abilities that he could prove himself stronger than even the most powerful elemental. That has been known to happen. The sorcerer, the worst one of all, was he an adept? Actually, no. Malevolent was an elemental. It's rare that you get an elemental straying so far down the dark paths, but it happens. There was a question Stephanie had been dying to ask, but she didn't want to appear too eager. As casually as she could, thumbs hooked into the belt loops of her jeans, she said, as if she had just plucked this out of thin air. So, how do you know if you can do magic? Can anyone do it? Not anyone. Relatively few, actually. Those who can usually congregate in the same areas, so there are small pockets of communities all over the world. In Ireland and the United Kingdom alone, there are 18 different neighborhoods populated solely by sorcerers. Can you be a sorcerer without realizing it? Oh, yes. Some people walk around every day, bored with their lives, having no idea that there's a world of wonder at their fingertips, and they live out their days completely oblivious, and they'll die without knowing how great they could have been. That's really sad. Actually, it's quite amusing. No, it's not. It's sad. How would you like it if you never discovered what you could do? I wouldn't know any better, Skullduggery answered, stopping beside her. We're here. Stephanie looked up. They had arrived outside a crumbling old tenement building. Tenement? Its wall defaced with graffiti, and its windows cracked and dirty. She followed him up the concrete steps and into the foyer, and together they ascended the sagging staircase. The first floor was quiet and smelled of damp. On the second floor, splintered shards of light escaped through the cracks between the door and doorway into the otherwise dark corridor. They could hear the sound of a TV from one of the apartments. When they got to the third floor, Stephanie knew that they had arrived. The third floor was clean, it didn't smell, and it was well lit. It was like an entirely different building. She followed Skullduggery to the middle of the corridor and noticed that none of the doors were numbered. She looked at the door that Skullduggery knocked on, and the door had a plaque fastened to it. Library. While they waited there, Skullduggery said, One more thing. No matter how much you might want to, do not tell her your name. The door opened before she could ask any more questions, and a thin man with large round spectacles peered out. His nose was hooked and his wiry hair was receding. He wore a checked suit with a bow tie. He glanced at Stephanie, then nodded to Skullduggery and opened the door wide for them to come through. Adjust my position. Pins and needles. Stephanie realized why none of the doors were numbered. It was because they all led to the same room. The walls between apartments had been taken away in order to accommodate the vast number of books on the shelves. Stacks and stacks of books, a labyrinth of bookshelves that stretched from one side of the building to the other. As they followed the bespectacled man through the maze, she saw more people, their attention focused on their reading, people half hidden in shadow, people who didn't look exactly right. In the middle of the library was an open space, like a clearing in the forest, and in this open space stood the most beautiful woman Stephanie had ever seen. Her hair was black as raven wings, and her eyes were the palest blue. Her features were so delicate Stephanie feared they might break if she smiled. And then the lady smiled, and Stephanie felt such warmth that for an instant she never wanted to be anywhere else but at this lady's side. "Stop that," said Skullduggery. The lady let her eyes move to him, and her smile was playful. Stephanie stared enraptured. Her body felt so heavy, so clumsy. All she wanted to do with her life was just stand here in this spot and gaze at pure and true beauty. "Stop that," Skullduggery said again, and the lady laughed and shrugged and looked back at Stephanie. "Sorry about that," she said, and Stephanie felt a fog lift from her mind. She felt dizzy and staggered, but Skullduggery was there, a hand on the small of her back, supporting her. "My apologies," the lady said, giving her a small bow. "I do forget the effect I have on people, first impressions and all that." "Seems like every time you meet someone new, you forget that little fact," Skullduggery said. "I'm a scatterbrain, what can I say?" Skullduggery grunted and turned to Stephanie. "Don't feel self-conscious. The first time anyone sets eyes on China, they fall in love. Believe me, the effect lessens the more you get to know her." "Lessens," the woman named China said, "but never entirely goes away, does it, Skullduggery?" The detective took off his hat and looked at China, but ignored her question. China smiled at Stephanie and handed her a business card. It was eggshell white and bore a single telephone number etched with a delicate elegance. "Feel free to call me if you ever stumble across a book or an item you think I might be interested in. Skullduggery used to. He doesn't anymore. Too much water has flowed under the proverbial bridge, I'm afraid. Oh, where are my manners? My name is China Sorrows, my dear. And you are—" Stephanie was about to tell China her name when Skullduggery turned his head to her sharply, and she remembered what he had said. She frowned. The urge to tell this woman everything was almost overwhelming. "You don't need to know her name," Skullduggery said. "All you need to know is that she witnessed someone breaking into Gordon Edgley's house. He was looking for something. What would Gordon have that someone might want?" "You don't know who he was?" "He wasn't anyone. His master, that's who I'm after." "So who do you think his master is?" Skullduggery didn't answer, and China laughed. "Serpine again? My darling, you think Serpine is the culprit between practically every crime." "That's because he is." "So why come to me?" "You hear things." "Do I?" "People talk to you." "I am very approachable." "I was wondering if you'd heard anything. Rumors, whispers, anything." "Nothing that would help you." "But you have heard something." "I've heard nonsense. I've heard something that doesn't even deserve to be called a rumor. Apparently, Serpine has been making inquiries about the scepter of the ancients." "What about it?" "He's looking for it." "What do you mean? The scepter's a fairy tale." "Like I said, it's nonsense." Skullduggery fell silent for a moment, as if he was storing that piece of information away for further study. When he spoke again, it was with a new line of questioning. "So what would Gordon have that he, or anyone else, might want?" "Probably quite a lot," China answered. "Dear Gordon was like me. He was a collector, but I don't think that's the question you should be asking." Skullduggery thought for a moment. "Ah." Stephanie looked between the two of them. "What? What?" "The question," Skullduggery said, "is not what did Gordon have that someone might want to steal, but rather what did Gordon have that someone had to wait until he was dead in order to steal it?" Stephanie looked at him. "Is there a difference?" China answered her. "There are items that cannot be taken, possessions that cannot be stolen. In such a case, the owner must be dead before anyone can take advantage of its powers. If you hear anything that might be of use, Skullduggery said, will you let me know? And what do I get in return? China responded, that smile playing on her lips again. My appreciation? Tempting, that is tempting. Then how about this, Skullduggery said. Do it as a favor for a friend. A friend, China said. After all these years, after everything that's happened, are you saying that you're my friend again? I was talking about Gordon. China laughed, and Stephanie followed Skullduggery as he walked back through the stacks. They left the library and traveled back the way they came. Fucking China Sorrows, man! I think she's like one of my top 3 characters of the book.
Hot.
She's very hot.
Gay.
Also that. When they were out on the street, Stephanie... Luna's just right in front of you.
Hi, baby.
Stephanie spoke up at last. So that was China Sorrows, she said. Yes, that was, Skullduggery responded. A woman not to be trusted. Beautiful name, though. Like I said, names are power. There are 3 names for everyone. The name you're born with, the name you're given, and the name you take. Everyone, no matter who they are, is born with a name. You were born with a name. Do you know what it is? Is this a trick question? Do you know what your name is? Yes, Stephanie Edgley. No. No? That's your given name. That's the name other people handed you. If a mage with any kind of knowledge wanted to, he could use that name to influence you, to attain some small degree of control, to make you stand, sit, speak, things like that. Like a dog. I suppose so. You're likening me to a dog. No, he paused. Well, yes. Oh, cheers. But you have another name, a real name, a true name. A name unique to you and you alone. What is it? I don't know. You don't know it either, at least not consciously. The name gives you power, but it would also give other people absolute power over you. If someone knew it, they could command your loyalty, your love, everything about you. Your free will would be totally eradicated, which is why we keep our true names hidden. So what's the third name? The name you take. It can't be used against you, it can't be used to influence you, and it's your first defense against a sorcerer's attack. Your taken name seals your given name, protects it, and that's why it's so important to get it right. So, Skullduggery is the name you took. It is. What about me? Should I have a third name? He hesitated for only a moment. If you're going to be accompanying me on this, then yes, you probably should. And am I going to be accompanying you? That depends. Do you need your parents' permission? Stephanie's parents wanted her to find her own way in life. That's what they'd said countless times in the past. Of course, they'd been referring to school subjects and college applications and job prospects. Presumably, at no stage did they factor living skeletons and magic underworlds into their considerations. If they had, their advice would probably have been very different. Stephanie shrugged. No, not really. Well, that's good enough for me. They reached the car and got in, and as they pulled out off the road, she looked at him. So who's this Serpine you were talking about? Nefarian Serpine is one of the bad guys. I suppose now that Malevolent has gone, he's considered the bad guy. What's so bad about him? The purr of the engine was all that filled the car for a few moments. Serpine is an adept, Skullduggery said at last. He was Malevolent's most trusted lieutenant. You heard what China was saying about how she is a collector, about how Gordon was a collector? Well, Serpine is a collector too. He collects magic. He has tortured, maimed, and killed in order to learn other people's secrets. He has committed untold atrocities in order to uncover obscure rituals, searching for the one ritual that he and religious fanatics like him has been seeking for generations. Back when the war broke out, he had this weapon. These days, he's full of surprises, but he still uses it because, quite frankly, there is no defense against it. What's the weapon? To put it simply, agonizing death. Agonizing death on its own? Not like fired from a gun or anything? He just has to point his right red hand at you and, well, like I said, agonizing death. It's a necromancy technique. Necromancy. Death magic, a particularly dangerous adept discipline. I don't know how he learned it, but learned it he did. And what does the scepter thing have to do with all this? Nothing. It has nothing to do with anything. Well, what is it? It's a weapon of unstoppable destructive power, or it would be if it actually existed. It's a rod about the length of your thigh bone. Actually, I think I might have a picture of it. He pulled the car over and got out to open the Bentley's boot. Stephanie had never been to this part of town before. The streets were quiet and empty. She could see the bridge over the canal in the distance. Moments later, Skullduggery was back behind the wheel. They were driving again, and Stephanie had a leather-bound book on her lap. "What's this?" she asked, opening the clasp and flicking through the pages. "Our most popular myths and legends," said Skullduggery. "You just pass the scepter." She flicked back and came to a reproduction of a painting of a wide-eyed man reaching for a golden staff with a black crystal embedded in its hilt. The scepter was glowing and he was shielding his eyes. On the opposite page was another picture, this time of a man holding the scepter, surrounded by cowering figures, their heads turned away. Who's this guy? He's an ancient. In the legends, they were the very first sorcerers, the first to wield the power of the elements, the first to use magic. They lived apart from the mortal world, had no interest in it. They had their own ways, their own customs, and their own gods. Eventually, they decided that they wanted to have their own destinies too, so they rose up against their gods, rather nasty beings called the Faceless Ones, and battled them on the land, in the skies, and in the oceans. The Faceless Ones, being immortal, won every battle until the ancients constructed a weapon powerful enough to drive them back. The scepter. You sound like you know the story well. Tales around campfire might seem quaint now, but it's all we had before movies. The Faceless Ones were banished, forced back to wherever they came from. So what's happening here? He's killing his gods? Yep. The scepter was fueled by the ancients' desire to be free. That was the most powerful force they had at their disposal. So it's a force for freedom? Originally. However, once the ancients no longer had the Faceless Ones to tell them what to do, they started fighting among themselves. They turned the scepter on each other and fueled it with hate. The streetlights played on his skull as they passed in and out of darkness, flashing bone white in a hypnotic rhythm. The last ancient, he continued, having driven his gods away, having killed all of his friends and all of his family, realized what he had done and hurled the scepter deep into the earth, where the ground swallowed it. What did he do then? Probably went for a snooze. I don't know, it's a legend. It's an allegory, it didn't really happen. So why does Serpine think it's real? Now that is puzzling. Like his master before him, he believes in some of our darker myths, our more disturbing legends. He believes the world was a better place when the Faceless Ones were in charge. They didn't exactly approve of humanity, you see, and they demanded worship. The ritual that he's been looking for, is it to bring them back? It is indeed. So he might think that the scepter, which drove them away, could somehow call them home, right? People believe all kinds of things when it comes to their religion. Do you believe any of it? The ancients, Faceless Ones, any of it? I believe in me, Stephanie, and that's enough for now. So, could the scepter be real? Highly unlikely. So, what does all of this have to do with my uncle? I don't know, Skullduggery admitted. That's why they call it a mystery. Light filled the car, and suddenly the world was bucking. The only sounds a terrifying crash and the shriek of metal on metal. Stephanie lurched against her seatbelt and slammed her head against the window. The street outside tilted wildly, and she realized the Bentley was flipping over. She heard Skullduggery curse beside her, and for an instant she was weightless. And then the Bentley hit the ground again and jarred her against the dashboard. It rocked back onto its tires. Stephanie looked at her knees, her eyes wide, but her brain too stunned to think. Look up, said a faint voice in her head. Look up to see what's happening. The Bentley was still, its engine cut out, but there was another engine. a car door opening and closing. Look up! Footsteps, running footsteps. Look up now! Skullduggery beside her, not moving. Look up, there's someone coming for you. Look up now! A window exploded beside her for the second time that night, and the man from the house was grabbing her and hauling her out of the car.
Ooh.
I think that's where we're going to end it.
Brutal.
The next chapter is chapter 6. So yeah, that's where, this is the first time I get to fold down a page corner. And I am a page corner book person. I don't care who gets angry. That's what I do, and that's what I will always do. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I fucking love these books.
I enjoyed it until you folded the page corner.
Nah, I'll live with it.
That was good. Yeah, that would make the most incredible stop motion film.
Yes.
Ooh. Ooh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like that's the kind of film that they would try to make into a live action and just wouldn't do it justice.
Yeah. I mean, it's so hard. Like, I just feel like the CGI skeleton, like, unless done, like, pristinely, would be really difficult to get right. So either, like, a very well done animated film or a stop motion film, I think, lends itself best. But
yeah.
Luna's being so cute. You sleepy girl.
Yeah, baby.
You sleepy girl. Yeah. But yeah, it does. They have to set up an awful lot of stuff, but they do a good job of like making it entertaining. Like
fun.
They're having to cover a lot of lore. They're having to introduce you to different people. You haven't met Ghastly yet. Oh my god, Ghastly is like the best character of the entire series. I want to die. I love him.
It's really funny that you grew up with this instead of Harry Potter, because this is very it's got a very similar vibe.
Yeah, very similar vibe. But different humor.
Yeah, I like. It's very like. Yeah, it's very funny. I like it.
You sleeping? Did you like the reading? You're just a baby, huh?
You're just a baby.
But anyway, I hope this was a nice little live stream. I will read the next chapters in a different live stream, which I'll announce on Twitter and Instagram and all that jazz. And yeah, thank you for hanging out with me. This is just like a nice thing for me to do too, because I need to get out of my head as much as anyone else. So what better world to get stuck into? So so everyone who stayed with me, thank you. And yeah, I'll catch you next time. Okay. Yep, that's my hair. No, we're not gonna do that. All right, take care of yourselves, everyone. Bye. Say bye.